The night Ruby Calloway walked into the Silver Spur Saloon was the night that every man in Dusty Creek, Texas, held his breath without knowing why. It was the autumn of 1882, and the town of Dusty Creek sat on the edge of the Texas Panhandle like a forgotten coin dropped at the feet of a vast and indifferent sky. The railroad had come through 2 years prior, dragging with it a surge of settlers, drifters, cattlemen, and merchants who planted themselves in the red dust and declared themselves citizens of something new. The saloon had been the beating heart of the town since the beginning, a 2-story wooden structure with a wraparound porch that groaned under the weight of too many boots and too many secrets. Inside, the lamps burned amber and the piano player never stopped unless someone put a gun to his head, which happened more often than any decent person cared to admit. Ruby stepped through the swinging doors with the kind of stillness that turns noise into silence. She was 23 years old, with dark auburn hair pinned loosely at the nape of her neck and hazel eyes that caught the lamplight and threw it back sharper than a mirror. She wore a traveling dress of deep burgundy wool, road dusty at the hem, and she carried a carpet bag in one hand and a piece of folded paper in the other. She was not the kind of woman men forgot, but more importantly, she was not the kind of woman who wanted to be remembered for the wrong reasons. The moment she stepped fully inside, conversation dropped like a stone into a still pond. Every head turned. The piano player played one final note and let it ring. Ruby scanned the room with deliberate calm. She had been traveling for 11 days from Memphis, Tennessee, following a letter that promised her a position as a schoolteacher in Dusty Creek. The letter had been sent by a man named Harold Finch, who served as both the mayor and the primary landowner of the town. She had corresponded with him through the local newspaper's placement notices, exchanged 3 letters, and accepted the offer in good faith. What she had not expected was to arrive and find Harold Finch's wife standing on the porch of the schoolhouse with a broom and a look that could have cured leather. The schoolteacher position, it turned out, had been filled by Harold's wife's cousin. 3 weeks ago, nobody had thought to write Ruby a letter about it. So there she stood in the Silver Spur, the only establishment still open past sundown that was not the jail, holding a piece of paper that meant nothing now and trying to figure out what exactly a woman alone in a strange Texas town did next. The man who ran the saloon was a heavy-set fellow named Tom Garrity, who wore red suspenders and a mustache that had ambitions beyond his face. He came around from behind the bar with his hands spread wide in a gesture that was trying to be welcoming, but ended up looking like he was shooing chickens. "Evening, ma'am," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "You lost." "No," Ruby said calmly. "I am precisely where I intended to be. I understand you may have rooms to let upstairs, and I would like to inquire about board." Tom Garrity blinked. The room had not resumed its noise. Everyone was still watching. "Board's for my girls," he said carefully. "I am not one of your girls," Ruby said with no heat in it, just certainty. "I am a schoolteacher without a school. I have money enough for 2 weeks' board, and I am told you serve food here. I would like a room, a meal, and quiet in that order." Tom Garrity rubbed the back of his neck. He looked out at the room as if seeking guidance from the assembled drinkers and gamblers, which was possibly the least useful thing a man could do. Several of them shrugged. One of the men at the nearest table, a broad-shouldered cattle broker named Walt Jessup, leaned forward with a grin spreading under his red beard. "Tell you what, sweetheart," Walt said, not unkindly but not carefully either, "a woman like you doesn't need to be worrying herself about board money." He looked around at his friends with the easy authority of a man who owned more acres than he could ride across in a day. "Tom, why don't you let the room question sit for a spell? Miss, why don't you let us buy you a drink and settle your nerves?" Ruby looked at him with an expression that was difficult to categorize. It was not offended. It was not afraid. It was the expression of a woman doing arithmetic. "That is kind of you," she said. Tom Garrity relaxed slightly. A couple of the saloon girls appeared from the back, curious. The piano player's hands hovered over his keys. Walt Jessup straightened in his chair. Well then, come on over and sit yourself down, we'll get you sorted out. Ruby did not move toward him immediately. Instead, she turned back to Tom Garrity. The room, she said again. Tom sighed in the particular way of a man who knew he had already lost an argument. $2 a week, meals included, you share the washroom. Agreed. Ruby reached into her carpet bag and produced 2 neat silver dollars, which she set on the bar with a crisp click. 1 week to begin. That settled, she turned to face the room again. The noise had begun to return in fragments, low conversation and the clink of glasses, but there was still a current of attention moving through the crowd that Ruby felt the way you feel a change in weather before the clouds arrive. Walt Jessup was grinning still, and he was not alone. There were perhaps 30 men in that saloon on a Wednesday evening, and most of them had turned themselves to face her direction with varying degrees of subtlety. A few of the cattlemen near the bar had straightened their postures. One young man with a shock of blonde hair had actually removed his hat. It was at this moment that Edgar Kane, who ran the general store and fancied himself something of a social coordinator, raised his glass in a toast that nobody had asked for. "Well, gentlemen," Edgar said jovially, "I believe this town just got itself one handsome schoolteacher. Miss, the whole of Dusty Creek is at your disposal. Pick any man in this room, and I'll wager he'll see to it. You don't spend a single night worrying about what comes next." There was laughter, good-natured mostly, and the kind of nudging that goes on between men who think a situation is amusing in a way that has not considered the other person in it. Several men straightened further. Walt Jessup spread his hands as if to say, "Here I am." The blond young man with the hat in his hands actually blushed. Ruby let the laughter run its course. She was not embarrassed, but she was looking at the room now with a different kind of attention, the way a person looks at a map when they are genuinely trying to find something specific. And then she saw the corner. He was seated at a table near the far wall, away from the windows, with his back to the corner in the way of a man who had developed the habit for practical reasons. He had a cup of coffee in front of him, not whiskey, which was unusual enough to notice. He was tall even sitting down, broad through the shoulder, dressed in a plain dark jacket that had seen hard work and rain and been cared for afterward. His hat was on the table beside the coffee. His hair was dark and a little long, curling slightly at the collar. He had a strong jaw and the kind of lines around his eyes that come from squinting into sun and wind for years, not from age exactly, more from a life lived outdoors. He looked to be somewhere around 28 or 29. He was not looking at her. That was what caught her attention more than anything else. In a room where every other male creature had turned toward her like sunflowers toward light, this man had his gaze on the middle distance, his coffee cup held loosely in both hands, his expression settled and remote. He had heard Edgar Kane's proclamation. She could see the faint tension in his jaw that said he found it unpleasant, but he had not looked. Ruby made her decision with the same quiet efficiency she had made every decision since stepping off the stage that afternoon. She picked up her carpet bag and walked across the saloon. The room noticed. The room went very quiet again because she was not walking toward Walt Jessup or the blond young man or any of the eager faces that had arranged themselves for her consideration. She was walking to the corner. The man in the corner heard the change in the room's sound before he processed what it meant. He looked up. Ruby set her carpet bag down beside the empty chair at his table, pulled it out, and sat down. He stared at her. She met his eyes. They were gray-green, the color of sage after rain, and they were, at this particular moment, expressing something between surprise and caution. "You were the only one not looking," she said quietly. "In my experience, that is either a very bad sign or a very good one. I am choosing to believe it is the latter." He was silent for a moment. Across the room, the collective breath of 30 men released itself, and the noise flooded back in, though it was the pointed noise of people pretending not to be listening. "Cole Whitmore," he said finally, and his voice was low and even, the kind of voice that did not rush itself. "Ruby Calloway," she said. "I am a schoolteacher without a school. newly arrived in a town I have never been to, with nowhere to sleep except a room above a saloon. And you are the only person in this establishment who did not look at me like I was a horse at an auction." Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth exactly, not yet, more like the careful withdrawal of a wall. "That is not a high bar," he said. "No," she agreed, "but it is the bar I have been offered tonight." He looked at her for a long moment, then he looked at his coffee, then he looked at Tom Garrity behind the bar and raised 2 fingers. Tom, who had been watching the corner with frank amazement, sent a girl over with a second cup. "You said you had nowhere to sleep," Cole said. "Tom has rooms." "I have already arranged one," Ruby said. "I am not here because I need rescuing. I am here because I have been traveling for 11 days. I have just discovered that the purpose of that travel no longer exists, and I would like to sit in a corner quietly with someone who does not expect anything of me." He considered this. "All right," he said. They sat in companionable quiet for a while, which was a remarkable thing to achieve in the Silver Spur Saloon on a Wednesday evening. Ruby drank her coffee and felt the bone-deep weariness of the journey settle in now that she had stopped moving. Cole drank his coffee and studied the room with the same unhurried watchfulness that had, 10 minutes ago, made him the only man not staring at the door. "What brought you to Dusty Creek?" she asked eventually. "Cattle Drive ended north of here," he said. "Figured I'd stop before pushing on to the next thing." "What is the next thing?" "Haven't decided yet." Ruby turned her cup in her hands. "I came here for a teaching position. It was given to someone else while I was in transit. The man who offered it did not see fit to write and tell me." Cole's jaw tightened slightly. "Harold Finch," he said, and it was not a question. Ruby looked at him. "You know him?" "I know of him. He's the kind of man who forgets his obligations if something more convenient comes along." A pause. "I'm sorry that happened to you." "Thank you," she said, and she meant it with a sincerity that seemed to surprise him because he glanced at her again with that measuring quality. "I will figure something out. I always do." "What are you considering?" "There are children in this town without proper schooling," Ruby said. "The building exists. Whether I have Finch's appointment or not, the need exists. I am considering whether I can establish my own arrangement." Cole set down his cup slowly. "That would require money and a sponsor, and probably the approval of men who will not give it easily." "Yes," Ruby said. "That is generally how things go." He looked at her with something new in his expression now, something that was not quite admiration because it had not had time to become that yet, but was the first thing that comes before it, which is recognition. The recognition of a mind that works in a particular way and finding it familiar. "You are not easily discouraged," he said. "I was discouraged on the stagecoach," she said. "I gave myself the afternoon for it. I am done now." Cole Whitmore almost smiled. It was the almost that got her, because it was so clearly not performed. It was the expression of a man who felt something and did not immediately know what to do with the feeling. It passed quickly, but she saw it. They talked until the saloon began to empty, which in Dusty Creek meant well past 9 o'clock. The piano player went home. Walt Jessup and his friends left in a cloud of cigar smoke and loud opinions. The saloon girls moved through the remaining customers with practiced patience. Ruby learned that Cole had been driving cattle since he was 17, that he had grown up on a small ranch outside of San Antonio that his father had lost to debt when Cole was 20, that he had spent the past 9 years working other men's land and other men's cattle, and that he was 30 years old. She told him about Memphis, about the school where she had taught for 2 years before the family that employed her decided they no longer needed a live-in teacher, about the decision to move west where the need was greatest, and where, she had read in newspapers, the opportunities were different if not always equal. She did not make her history sound romantic or tragic, just factual, and Cole listened with the full attention of someone who genuinely found another person interesting, which is rarer than it should be. When Ruby finally stood to go up to her room, Cole rose as well. He was taller than she had estimated, close to 6 feet, and there was a quietness in the way he moved that spoke of self-containment rather than reserve. "Miss Calloway," he said, "I hope you find what you are looking for in Dusty Creek." "I hope the same for you, Mr. Whitmore," she said. She picked up her carpet bag. "Will you be here tomorrow?" He seemed to consider whether to answer honestly. "Probably," he said. She nodded once like the matter was concluded and went upstairs. Cole stood at the empty table for a moment, looking at nothing in particular, and then sat back down and poured himself more coffee from the pot a girl had left, and sat in his corner with the expression of a man who has just been surprised and is still in the process of deciding how he feels about it. The next morning, Ruby Calloway stood in front of the Dusty Creek schoolhouse at 7 in the morning with her shoulders back and her purpose assembled around her like armor. The schoolhouse was a single-room building with 4 windows and a small iron stove that had not been used in months. The sign above the door said Dusty Creek School in letters that needed repainting. The door was unlocked. She went inside. The benches were dusty. The blackboard had a crack through the middle of it. There were no slates, no primers, and no chalk. There was, however, a desk, a broom, and the particular quality of morning light that makes empty rooms feel full of possibility. She was sweeping when she heard boots on the step. Harold Finch was a man of 50 with a prosperous belly and the kind of handshake that squeezes too hard. He had a deputy beside him, a narrow young man named Pete who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. "Miss Calloway," Harold said, in the tone of a man who is about to deliver an unpleasant message and has prearranged his face accordingly. "I understand you arrived in town last night. I am sorry you were not informed of the change in circumstances regarding the teaching position." "I am also sorry," Ruby said pleasantly. "What I am more interested in is whether the need for a teacher in this school remains, regardless of the current administrative arrangements." Harold blinked. "The position has been filled." "By your wife's cousin," Ruby said, "who has, I understand, not yet begun teaching because the room is not in suitable order." "I have already begun to address that." She gestured behind her at the swept floor. Harold's expression cycled through several stages. "Miss Calloway, I cannot pay you for a position that has been promised to another." "Then don't pay me yet," Ruby said. "Let me teach for 2 weeks without pay. Let the parents of this town decide which arrangement they prefer. Then we discuss payment." Harold stared at her. "That is an unusual proposal." "I am in an unusual situation," Ruby said. "One that you created, Mr. Finch, without much consideration for what it would cost me. I am not asking you to fix that. I am asking you to allow me to demonstrate my value and let the town decide." The deputy Pete was staring at the ceiling with the expression of a man watching a drama he had not purchased a ticket for. Harold Finch left without giving her a definitive answer, which she correctly identified as the absence of an outright no, and went back to her sweeping. By 10 o'clock, she had been visited by 3 women of the town who had heard about the previous evening's events with the speed that small towns move information. One of them, a woman named Dorothea Marsh, who ran the dressmaker's shop across the street, brought her a loaf of bread and stayed for an hour. Dorothea had 2 children of school age and opinions about Harold Finch's wife's cousin that she delivered with the satisfaction of someone who has been waiting for an audience. "She taught piano in Amarillo," Dorothea said flatly. "Nice enough woman, I'm sure, but the Finch family wanted someone convenient, not someone qualified. You are clearly qualified, Miss Calloway." "I have been teaching since I was 19, Ruby said. "I have references from 2 schools in Tennessee." "Well," Dorothea set down her bread with finality, "we shall see." Cole found her at noon. She was still in the schoolhouse, using a piece of charcoal from the stove to write letters on the cracked blackboard, testing which side of the crack was more usable. He stood in the doorway for a moment before she turned. "You are still here," he said. "I told you I would figure something out," she said. He looked at the blackboard. He looked at the swept floor and the rearranged benches and the light coming through the windows that someone had propped open with sticks she had found leaning against the wall outside. "You have been busy," he said. "I cannot afford not to be," she said. She set down the charcoal. "What brings you here?" "Thought you might need supplies." He held up a paper parcel. "Chalk. Tom Garrity had some behind the bar, apparently. He said you could have it on the house." Ruby looked at the parcel of chalk, and then at Cole Whitmore standing in the schoolhouse doorway in the November sunlight, and felt something catch in her chest that she did not immediately examine. "That was thoughtful of you," she said. He set the chalk on the desk. He looked around the room with that measuring quality she had already come to associate with the way he approached things. "The stovepipe is disconnected," he said. "Winter comes hard here. You'll need heat within the month." "I noticed," she said. "I don't know how to fix a stovepipe." "I do," he said simply. He fixed the stovepipe that afternoon. He had the tools he needed in the saddlebag of a horse stabled at the livery. A black horse named Fletcher that he had owned for 4 years, and treated with the particular respect a man gives a partner rather than a possession. Ruby brought him water from the pump outside, and they talked across the sound of his work about the town, about the other buildings that needed attention, about the land around Dusty Creek that she had not yet had a chance to see. "Is it beautiful?" she asked. "The land?" He paused in his work. "Yes," he said, like the question had surprised him, and the answer had come before he could be careful with it. "I grew up with trees," she said. "Tennessee is all green and close. The sky here is bigger than anything I have ever seen." "That takes some getting used to," he said. "Some people never do. The openness can feel like exposure." "Does it feel that way to you?" He thought about it honestly. "It used to," he said. "Now it feels like freedom." Ruby leaned against the doorframe and looked out at the wide, flat sweep of the Panhandle beyond the edge of town, the red earth and the sparse grass and the sky that went on until it curved out of sight. She understood, for the first time since arriving, why someone might choose to stay here. The next several days unfolded with the particular texture of a life being built from scratch, which requires both urgency and patience simultaneously, and Ruby had both in good supply. She taught her first unofficial class to 7 children on Friday morning, their ages ranging from 6 to 14, their levels of prior instruction varying wildly. One boy named Thomas Marsh, Dorothea's eldest, could read fluently. His sister Clara could not yet write her own name. Ruby taught them both in the same room on the same morning and found strategies for each with the ease of someone who genuinely loved the work. Word traveled. By Monday, she had 11 children. Harold Finch watched the schoolhouse with increasing discomfort from across the street. His wife's cousin, a pleasant but inexperienced woman named Helen, had visited the schoolhouse, taken one look at Ruby Calloway in full pedagogical motion, and told Harold privately that she was not interested in competing with someone who clearly knew what they were doing. Helen, it transpired, was far more interested in the piano in the Silver Spur, and arrangements were made. Harold Finch came to the schoolhouse on the following Tuesday with a face arranged into something that was trying to look magnanimous and not quite succeeding. "Miss Calloway," he said, "the town council has agreed to formalize your appointment as school teacher. The wage is $12 a month, plus continued use of the upstairs room at the Silver Spur for board until suitable accommodation can be arranged." Ruby looked at him with steady hazel eyes. $14, she said. "The previous teacher in Amarillo was paid $14, and the cost of board should not come from my wage." Harold Finch sputtered for a moment. Behind him, Pete the deputy made a sound that might have been a laugh converted at the last instant into a cough. "13, Harold said. 13 and the board is separate," Ruby said. Harold Finch agreed to $13 and the board arrangement, and shook Ruby's hand with rather less enthusiasm than he usually brought to handshakes, and left. Ruby stood in the schoolhouse door and watched him go, and when she turned back inside, Cole Whitmore was leaning against the side of the building with his arms crossed, and an expression that was as close to a full smile as she had seen from him yet. 13 and board, he said. It was the right number, she said. I looked at the town's arrangement with the previous teacher. He was paid 12, I'm more qualified. "You are terrifying," Cole said, and it was absolutely a compliment. She laughed, which surprised them both slightly. It was a real laugh, unguarded and bright, and Cole's almost smile became a real one, brief and warm and gone so quickly it might have been doubted, except that it had happened and she had seen it. He had not left Dusty Creek. She had not asked him to stay, and he had not said explicitly that he was staying. But a week had passed, and his black horse Fletcher was still in the livery, and Cole Whitmore was still in his corner of the Silver Spur each evening, when Ruby came down from her room after supper. They had developed the habit of an evening coffee together, and the habit had the quality of something that neither of them had decided to have, but that had built itself one night at a time without requiring decision. The town noticed. Small towns always notice. Walt Jessup made a comment about it at the bar one evening that was framed as a joke, but had an edge underneath, the edge of a man who had expected something and been denied it. Cole heard the comment from across the room and looked at Walt Jessup with the kind of stillness that is more effective than any noise, and Walt Jessup found something very interesting to look at in the bottom of his glass. Dorothea Marsh, who had appointed herself Ruby's informal advocate, visited the schoolhouse the following afternoon and sat on one of the student benches with the air of a woman who has arrived for a purpose. "Cole Whitmore," Dorothea said, without preamble. Ruby continued writing on the blackboard. "What about him?" "He has been in Dusty Creek for 2 weeks," Dorothea said. "Cattle drives don't hold over that long unless a man is waiting for something or someone." "He mentioned he has not decided on his next plans," Ruby said carefully. Ruby. Dorothea had switched to first names sometime during the second day of their acquaintance, which Ruby found she did not mind. "He fixed your stovepipe. He brought you chalk. He is in that saloon every evening not because he drinks, which he does not, but because you come downstairs after supper." Ruby set down the chalk. She turned around. She was not a woman given to pretense, but she had been deliberate about not letting herself examine the catch in her chest too carefully, because she had too many practical matters to manage, and the heart is the most disruptive of organs when it gets involved. "He is a good man," she said finally. "I believe that. I also believe that I have known him for 2 weeks, and that I have just arranged a teaching position and a place to live, and that I am trying to build something here, and that men who drive cattle for a living do not stay in one place for very long." Dorothea regarded her with the expression of a woman who knows more than she is saying. "Ask him," she said simply. About the staying. Ruby did not ask him that evening. She did not ask him the evening after that. But on the third evening, when the saloon had quieted down and the lamp between them threw a warm circle of light over the table, she told him something she had not told anyone in Dusty Creek yet. "I had a plan," she said. "Before Memphis, before all of this. I wanted to go to a place where I could do real work, meaningful work, and put down roots somewhere that needed what I had to offer. I wanted to build something." She turned her cup. "I am starting to feel like this might be the place, but it scares me to believe that too quickly." Cole listened with the quality of attention that was one of the things she had come to find most extraordinary about him. He did not interject. He did not pivot to his own experience. He listened until she was finished. "What scares you about it?" he asked. "Being wrong," she said simply. "Committing to a place, to a plan, and having it come apart again." He nodded slowly. "I understand that," he said, and there was something in his voice that told her the understanding was personal and cost something to admit. "What keeps you from settling?" she asked. Not accusatory, genuinely curious. Cole was quiet for a moment. His thumb moved along the rim of his coffee cup in the way it did when he was thinking carefully about what he was going to say. "After my father lost the ranch," he said, "I worked for other men. I told myself it was practical, and it was. But I think the practical reason was also a useful cover for the fact that I was afraid to care too much about a piece of land again, because caring too much about a thing and then losing it is." He stopped. "Devastating," Ruby said quietly. "Yes," he said. The word sat between them like a stone dropped into water with its rings spreading outward. "But you cannot drive other men's cattle forever," she said. "No," he said. "I know that." "What would it take," she asked, "to stay somewhere?" He looked at her for a long moment. The lamp between them made the gray-green of his eyes something very warm. "The right reason," he said. Ruby held his gaze. Neither of them said anything else about it that evening, but something had shifted between them with the irrevocable quality of furniture being moved in a room, and you know after that that the room has been changed. November came in with cold teeth. Ruby added the iron stove to her morning routine, lighting it before the children arrived, and the schoolhouse became warm and purposeful. She had 16 students now, and had written to a school supply company in Fort Worth for primers and slates, which Harold Finch had grudgingly approved from the town budget after 3 mothers visited him in succession on the same morning. Cole had taken a temporary job with a local rancher named Hector Beaumont, helping to move cattle to winter pasture. The work was 3 weeks of hard riding in cold weather, and he had taken it partly because he needed the money and partly because Hector was a decent man who had said plainly that if Cole wanted work in the spring, it would be there. He had not said yes to the spring yet. He came to the saloon on the evenings he was not too far out on the range to ride back, and on the evenings he was not there, Ruby noticed his absence in the same way you notice a quiet that should not be quiet, and she addressed the noticing practically by sitting at their corner table with her lesson books and her planning, and the discipline of it was useful, and the corner did not feel the same without him. On the Friday of the second week of his riding for Hector, a cold rain came in off the plains, and Cole came back into town 2 days early, soaking through his jacket, and with Fletcher limping slightly from a stone bruise. He took care of the horse first, as he always did, and then came into the Silver Spur with his hat dripping and his expression set in the particular way of a man who is cold and tired and not going to say so. Ruby was at their table with a lamp and 3 lesson books. She looked up when he came in and then stood immediately. "Sit down," she said. "Tom, please bring hot coffee and whatever is warm in the kitchen." Cole sat. He was shivering slightly, which she suspected he was trying not to show. She went upstairs briefly and came back with the wool blanket from her own bed, which she set around his shoulders with an efficiency that did not leave room for argument, and he looked up at her with an expression that was stripped of all the careful control he usually maintained, surprised into openness by cold and tiredness and the unexpected kindness. "You don't have to," he said. "You fixed my stovepipe," she said. "We are even." He laughed, short and genuine, and she felt the sound of it somewhere deep in her chest, and that was the moment she stopped being careful about what she noticed. Tom Garrity brought coffee and a bowl of beef stew and a basket of cornbread, and Cole ate with the single-minded focus of a man who has been outside in November rain for 14 hours, and Ruby sat across from him and watched him come back to himself gradually, the way warmth works its way back into cold hands. When he was done, he leaned back with the blanket still around his shoulders and looked at her across the lamp. "I missed this," he said. And then, as if the cold had removed some of the careful management he usually applied to his own words, "I missed you." Ruby did not look away. "I know," she said. "I missed you too." They looked at each other across the table in the Silver Spur Saloon in Dusty Creek, Texas, in November of 1882, and the thing between them, which had been building quietly for weeks the way rivers build against ice, broke through. He reached across the table and set his hand over hers. His hand was calloused from rain and rope and honest work, and warm now from the coffee. Her hand turned under his and their fingers settled together with the ease of something long practiced, though it was the first time. "I've been thinking," Cole said, "about the spring." "What about it?" "Hector offered work, good work, the kind that could be steady." He paused. "He's also got 40 acres to the east that he's willing to sell at fair price to the right man. It's good land. There's a creek and grass and room to build." Ruby's breath came very carefully. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I've been driving other men's cattle for 9 years and I am finished with it," Cole said with the quiet finality of a man who has reached a decision he has needed to reach for a long time. "I'm saying that I want to stay." "Here," she said. "In Dusty Creek. With you." he said. "If you'll have me." He looked at her steadily. "I know it's been a matter of weeks. I know that's not the usual pace of things. But I have never in my life met a person who makes me feel like the world makes sense the way you do, and I would rather say the true thing at the right moment than the careful thing at the correct time." Ruby felt the warmth of that move through her like the coffee had moved through him. She thought of the plan she had been slowly rebuilding, the school, the route she had said she wanted, the right place to build something. She thought of what Dorothea had said about asking him about the staying. "You would need to buy the land," she said. "I have enough saved," he said. "I've been saving for 9 years and spending almost nothing. And the house takes time," he said, "but I can build." "I believe you," she said, and she meant both the literal and the larger thing simultaneously. "Is that a yes?" he said, and there was something in his voice that was trying not to be anxious and not quite succeeding, and that imperfect control was the most endearing thing she had ever heard from him. "That is a yes," she said. He released a breath that he had been holding for longer than she realized. His hand tightened around hers. December arrived in Dusty Creek with the particular ferocity of a Texas Panhandle winter, which is drier and colder and more relentless than the kind of cold that comes with snow. The ground hardened. The nights stretched long. Ruby stoked the schoolhouse stove every morning before first light and taught her students in coats and mittens until the room warmed enough to remove them. Cole had spoken to Hector Beaumont about the land to the east. Hector, a broad-shouldered man of 60 who had built his own ranch from nothing 40 years ago and respected the same quality in others, had agreed to sell at a price that was fair without being charitable, which is the kind of transaction that preserves the dignity of both parties. The papers were signed at the end of November. Cole Whitmore owned 40 acres of Texas Panhandle for the first time in his life. He did not say much about it, but Ruby saw what it meant to him in the way he sat the evening of the signing. He had come to their table and poured his coffee and sat for several minutes without speaking, and his expression was not the composed remoteness of his usual self but something quieter and more interior, the expression of a man sitting with a thing he has wanted for so long that having it requires adjustment. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Strange," he said. Then, "Good, very good." Strange and good. She reached across and covered his hand with hers, which had become the natural language of their evenings. He turned his hand and held hers. Cole began building in December, which was perhaps not the conventional timing, but was the timing he had, and he had never been one to wait for convenience when work needed doing. He built with lumber from the mill in town, and with help from 2 men he had befriended in his weeks in Dusty Creek, a quiet carpenter named Samuel Rhodes who was in his mid-30s, and a rancher's younger son named Pete Anson who was 19 and eager and surprisingly skilled with a hammer for someone who had mostly grown up moving cattle. Ruby visited the land on the first clear Saturday in December, riding out with Cole on Fletcher, while she borrowed a small, steady mare from the livery. The 40 acres lay in a long sweep east of town, broken by the creek he had mentioned, a winter-thin but clear-running thread of water that wound through a stand of cottonwood trees Silver Bear in December. The grass was dry and gold, and the sky above was the color of iron, and the land had the particular quality of a place that is waiting for someone to see it properly. Ruby stood on the slight rise where Cole planned to site the house and looked out over the land and the winter sky and the thread of water below, and felt something she had not felt in a long time, which was the unmistakable knowledge of having arrived. "It's beautiful," she said. Cole stood beside her, his shoulder close to hers, his eyes on the land with the quiet possession of someone who is still learning to believe the thing is real. "I know," he said. She looked sideways at him. "Which beautiful thing are you looking at?" she asked, because she had earned the right to be direct with him. He turned and looked at her with the full gray-green steadiness of his gaze and said, "Both of them," simply and without performance, and Ruby Calloway, who had crossed 11 days of territory alone to come to a place that had promptly taken away her reason for coming, understood that things sometimes take you apart, so they can put you back together better." He kissed her for the first time on that rise of ground above the creek. It was unhurried and certain, the way Cole did everything, with both hands in it and no part of him elsewhere. She kissed him back with the full attention of a woman who has made a decision and is completely committed to it. And the Texas wind came across the land, and the cottonwoods shifted their bare silver branches, and the creek moved below them, and the whole vast sky witnessed it without any particular ceremony, which was exactly right. Christmas came to Dusty Creek with the modest celebration of a frontier town, a tree in the Silver Spur decorated with colored ribbons, a church service in the morning for those who attended, a communal dinner at the Marsh House to which both Ruby and Cole were invited and arrived together without discussion, which communicated to Dusty Creek everything it needed to know. Dorothea Marsh caught Ruby in the kitchen while Cole was in the front room with Samuel Rhodes and Hector Beaumont talking about spring planting, and Dorothea held Ruby by both hands and looked at her with eyes that were very bright. "I told you to ask him about the staying," Dorothea said. "You did," Ruby agreed. "Well," Dorothea said. "He is building a house on 40 acres east of town," Ruby said. Dorothea made a sound of profound satisfaction and hugged Ruby with the enthusiasm of a woman who has been advocating for a thing and seen it through to its correct conclusion. The new year arrived, and with it the serious work of building. Cole worked 6 days a week when weather permitted and used the Sundays for the smaller detailed work that could be done inside the shell of what was becoming, by February, a recognizable structure. It was a one-story house of solid timber with 2 rooms initially, a kitchen and a main room, with the bones of a second room framed out to the east that could be finished when needed. The house sat on the rise above the creek precisely where Ruby had stood in December. She visited most Saturdays, sometimes bringing Thomas and Clara Marsh, who had developed a fascination with the construction, and who were in Cole's opinion the most useful children he had encountered because they asked questions and then actually listened to the answers. Ruby would bring food wrapped in a cloth, and they would eat at noon on the shell of the porch, and Cole would tell her what had been completed that week and what remained to be done, and she would tell him about the school, about the students, about the ongoing diplomatic navigation of Harold Finch's periodic attempts to complicate her arrangement. In February, Harold Finch made one more significant attempt. A man from Austin arrived, a school inspector named Crawford who wore city clothes and carried a leather satchel, and who had been sent, it became apparent, at Harold's instigation to evaluate whether the school's operation met territorial standards. Harold had written to Austin with a complaint about the informal nature of Ruby's appointment, presumably hoping the inspector would find a technical reason to replace her. Crawford spent 2 hours in Ruby's schoolhouse on a Tuesday morning. He watched her teach. He looked at the lesson books, the slates that had arrived from Fort Worth, the careful curriculum she had developed for students at multiple levels. He interviewed 3 students individually and asked them about their progress. At the end of the 2 hours, he sat down with Ruby and opened his satchel. "Miss Calloway," he said, "your operation is not only meeting territorial standards, it is exceeding them. The multi-level instruction method is one that newer training programs are recommending, and most rural teachers don't implement successfully. You have 21 enrolled students, which is an excellent figure for a town this size." He paused. "Who filed the complaint that sent me here?" "I would rather not speculate," Ruby said. Crawford made a note in his book. "I am going to recommend this school to the territorial board as an example of good practice," he said. "I hope you plan to stay." "I do," Ruby said. Harold Finch said nothing more about the school after Crawford's report was filed. He was not a man who changed his character, but he had enough practical intelligence to recognize when a fight was over. Spring came to Dusty Creek in March with a warmth that arrived gradually, and then all at once, the way springs do in the south, and the land east of town turned from gold to green with the rain that came in the first weeks of the month. Cole's house was finished enough to be habitable by the first week of April. The main room and kitchen were complete. The second room was framed and roofed, though not yet finished inside. The porch ran the full width of the front of the house and looked out over the creek and the cottonwoods, which were beginning to leaf in pale gold green. It was on that porch, on a Saturday evening in late March when the house was almost done, and the sun was going down over the Panhandle, in the particular extravagance of color that the Texas sky achieves when it decides to show what it can do, that Cole Whitmore proposed to Ruby Calloway. He had been thinking about how to do it. He was not a man given to theatrical gesture, and he did not think Ruby wanted theatrical gesture, which was one of the many things he loved about her, that she had no use for pretense. But he wanted to do it properly. He had a ring, a simple gold band with a small turquoise stone that he had found at the jeweler's in town, the turquoise the same gray-blue as the winter sky and the summer sage, and the color that was between those two that he could not name. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, with coffee that had gone cold in their hands because neither of them had thought to drink it, and Cole reached into his pocket and held the ring out to her on his open palm. "Ruby," he said, "I would like you to be my wife. I would like to build the rest of this life with you on this land. I know what I am offering is not finished yet. The east room is still framed walls, and I am not a rich man, and this is a hard country, but I will work for it honestly, and I will love you honestly, and I will be here, always here, which is the thing I am most certain of." Ruby looked at the ring in his palm. She looked at his face, which had the particular quality of a man who has laid everything he has on the table and is waiting with complete patience for whatever comes next. "Cole," she said, "you do not need to tell me what you are offering. I know exactly what you are offering. I have been watching you build it." She took the ring from his palm. "Yes," she said, "that is my answer, without reservation and without waiting." He put the ring on her finger, and then they were both standing somehow, which neither of them had planned, and he held her face in both his calloused, work-worn hands and kissed her with the same certainty and tenderness as the first time, and she leaned into him the way you lean into something that is solid and permanent and yours. They were married in June, on the porch of the house above the creek, with Dorothea Marsh and Hector Beaumont standing up for them, and Thomas and Clara Marsh throwing wildflowers they had picked that morning from the meadow by the water. The town minister, a man named Reverend Dalby, who had a long beard and a genuinely good heart, spoke words that were sincere and brief, which Ruby appreciated. The whole wedding party had coffee and pie afterward on the porch, and Cole shook hands with men he had come to call friends, and Ruby laughed at something Dorothea said, and the afternoon light came gold and warm across the 40 acres. Samuel Rhodes gave them a rocking chair he had made himself over the winter, without telling anyone, and set it on the porch as his wedding gift, and Cole looked at it for a moment and then shook Samuel's hand with both of his, which for Cole was the equivalent of a very long speech. Summer passed the way first married summers pass, which is to say too quickly, and with a richness that accumulates faster than you can inventory it. Ruby taught through the summer months with a reduced class, as many families needed older children for field work in the growing season. She used the time to develop new materials for the fall term, to correspond with other teachers in the territory about methods, and to finish the east room of the house herself, with Cole's help on weekends, painting the walls a pale, warm yellow, and sewing curtains from fabric Dorothea helped her choose. Cole worked Hector's ranch through the summer and came home each evening to the house above the creek, which was a thing he had not had in 9 years and which he was still, at the end of July, slightly astonished to have. He came home to the smell of supper and the lamp lit in the window, and Ruby, who had learned not to fight the Texas summer and kept the house cool by opening all the windows in the morning and closing them at noon, would be at the kitchen table with her lesson books or a letter, and she would look up when he came through the door with the expression that had become the best part of his day, which was the expression of a person who is genuinely pleased to see you because you are exactly who they wanted. He fell more deeply in love with her every week. He had not known that was how it worked, that the feeling he had had in the Silver Spur that first night, which was already more than he had expected, was only the beginning of something that grew with knowledge and time and the daily choosing of each other. In September, Ruby discovered she was expecting their first child, and she told Cole on the porch in the evening with her hands around her coffee and a directness that was entirely her. "We are going to have a child," she said. Cole set down his cup. He looked at her. His expression moved through several things very quickly and arrived at something that was luminous and slightly overwhelmed and entirely genuine. "When?" he asked. "Spring," she said. "April, probably." He reached over and covered her hand with his. "Are you well?" he asked, because that was the first thing for him always. "Very well," she said. He looked out at the creek, which was high from the September rains, moving bright in the evening light below the porch. "A child," he said quietly, as if he was testing the reality of the word. "Our child," she said. He turned back to her, and she saw in his face the same quality she had seen the evening he signed the papers for the land, the expression of a man sitting with a thing he has wanted for a long time. He brought her hand up and pressed his lips to it, his eyes still on hers, and the tenderness of the gesture from a man of such natural reserve broke something open in her chest in the most wonderful way. "I will finish the east room properly before spring," he said. "We'll need the space." "You already finished the east room," she said. "We painted it yellow together in July." "I'll start on a third room then," he said. She laughed. "One thing at a time," she said. But he did start on the third room, framing it out through October between ranch days, and Samuel Rhodes came to help on weekends, and Pete Anson rode over on his days off with his hammer and his 19-year-old energy, and the house grew by one more room before the cold came in. Fall moved through Dusty Creek, and the school came back to full attendance in September, 24 children now, the largest class Ruby had managed. A new family named the Carvers had come from Missouri with 5 children ranging from 7 to 15, and they sat at the back of the room in a row and looked at Ruby with the wary attention of children who had been disappointed by schools before and were waiting to see if this one was different. By the end of the second week, the eldest Carver boy, a serious 14-year-old named James, had asked Ruby for an extra reader to take home, and she had given him one without comment, and that was the thing settled. Hector Beaumont's health began to fail in November, which was a grief to Cole and to the community. Hector had lived hard and honestly for 60 years, and the years had accumulated their cost, and the cold settled in his chest that autumn and did not leave. Cole rode to Hector's ranch every morning before his own work to check on him, and he and the ranch's foreman, a capable man named Del Torres, managed the winter operations between them. Hector died in January, peacefully and at home, which is the best that can be said of any death. He left his ranch to his son in New Mexico, who did not want to come north to run it, and to Del Torres he left the management of it with a fair wage, and to Cole Whitmore he left his working horses, 3 of them, and a letter that said simply, "You are the kind of man a piece of land deserves. Take care of yours." Cole read the letter at the kitchen table on the evening of the funeral, and Ruby saw his jaw work once with the effort of composure, and she came around the table and put her arms around him from behind, her chin on his shoulder, and he put his hands over hers, and they stayed that way for a while in the lamplight while the winter moved outside. February brought the cold deep and the baby moving clearly now, and Ruby taught her class seated more often than usual, which Thomas Marsh considered an interesting development and asked about with the directness of a 9-year-old, and Ruby told him plainly that the baby was making it more comfortable to sit, and Thomas nodded like this was useful information and passed it to his sister, who told her mother, who came to the schoolhouse the next day with a better chair. Cole had become, over the months, the person that the new men coming into Dusty Creek sought out without quite knowing why. the way you seek out someone who is steady in a place that is still finding its feet. He was not loud or prominent, but he was trusted, and trust in a frontier town is currency more reliable than paper. He helped Del Torres run the Beaumont operation through the winter. He helped 2 new families arriving from Kansas build their first structures on the land they had filed on east of town. And he sat on the Citizens Committee that was trying to establish a proper bank in Dusty Creek, not because he had political ambitions, but because he had practical competence, and the committee had asked him 3 times, which he felt was enough to constitute a real need. By March, the house above the creek had 4 rooms and a porch that looked south and east, and the cottonwoods below were beginning their first leaves again, and Ruby walked between rooms of her own house with her hands sometimes at her rounded belly, cataloging the space and the light and the sound of the creek, and felt the particular satisfaction of someone who built the thing they wanted rather than waiting for it to be given to them. Their son was born on the 14th of April, 1884, in the house above the creek, with the help of Dusty Creek's resident doctor, a capable woman named Martha Gaines, who had come west from Philadelphia 4 years prior, and who regarded childbirth with the brisk competence of someone who has seen it go wrong and is determined not to let it. Cole was in the main room during the hours that Martha Gaines was very clear he was to remain there, and he was the most still Ruby had ever heard him, which meant a great deal given that stillness was his natural condition. Martha came and updated him twice, and the second update included the information that everything was going well and he should stop wearing a hole in the floor. When Martha brought him in, the baby was cleaned and wrapped in the flannel Ruby had sewn in February, and Ruby was propped against the pillows with the particular exhaustion and radiance of a woman who has just done the hardest work of her life. She held the baby out toward Cole with the expression of someone giving someone else the best thing they have. Cole sat on the edge of the bed and took the baby in his arms with the extreme care of a man who has never done this before and is taking it very seriously. The baby was red-faced and dark-haired and small in the way that newborns are small, which is a specific smallness that undoes something in people who see it. Cole looked at his son for a long time and said nothing, and Ruby watched his face and saw things happen in it that he would probably never be able to put into words and did not need to. "What shall we call him?" Ruby asked. "I've been thinking," Cole said. He was still looking at the baby. "My father's name was Thomas." "Thomas Whitmore," Ruby said. "That's a good name." The baby blinked with the vague, unfocused attention of someone very new to the enterprise of seeing, and Cole touched the small fist with one finger, and the small fist closed around it with the reflexive grip of a newborn, and Cole looked up at Ruby with an expression she had never seen on his face before, which was the expression of a man who has been completely undone by something and is entirely at peace with it. "Tom," he said. "We'll call him Tom." The spring of 1884 bloomed around the Whitmore house above the creek with the kind of beauty that seems purposeful in retrospect. The cottonwoods full and luminous, the creek running with winter's melt, the grass coming in green across all 40 acres, and the wildflowers that appeared in the meadow below the house in colors Ruby had not been prepared for, deep gold and bright blue and red like a different version of fire. She carried baby Tom through the meadow in the mornings before school, which she had resumed 2 weeks after the birth, because Dorothea Marsh came every morning to mind the baby, and the routine of the school and the house and the land and Cole and the child wove together into something that was not simple but was genuinely whole. Tom grew the way healthy babies grow, visibly and demandingly, and with the full-throated commitment to being noticed that is the biological equipment of every newborn. By summer he was fat and purposeful. By fall he was trying to crawl with an intensity that Cole said reminded him of watching Fletcher the horse figure out a new terrain, which Ruby considered an interesting comparison. Cole bought 2 additional cattle from a sale in Amarillo that fall, modest beginnings of a small herd on the 40 acres that he was building carefully and without hurry. He was also offered a foreman's position at the Beaumont Ranch proper, which Del Torres was managing, but had grown too large for one man without help. Cole took the position because the wage was reliable and the work suited him, and the arrangement with Dell, who had become a friend, was one of mutual respect that worked the way good working arrangements work, with each man doing his part and neither requiring the other to be something he wasn't. 2 years passed in Dusty Creek with the texture of a life well occupied, which is not the texture of adventure or drama, but is in many ways the more demanding texture, requiring daily attention and regular small courage. Ruby's school grew to 31 students in the fall of 1885. She had persuaded the town to build a small addition to the schoolhouse to accommodate the numbers, and Harold Finch had approved it with the resigned air of a man who has learned that certain things are going to happen regardless of his position on them. Cole and Ruby's second child, a daughter they named June for the month she arrived and for the particular quality of that summer, came in 1886, and she was red-haired in a way that produced significant speculation about which side of the family to credit, and arrived with an opinion already formed about the world and its arrangements, which she communicated forcefully and immediately. Tom, who was 2 years old, regarded his sister with the cautious interest of someone who has not yet determined whether a new development is favorable or unfavorable, and eventually decided that it was favorable, and extended her his wooden horse as a gift, which June accepted and subsequently chewed on, which Tom found troubling. Cole watched his children in the evenings from the porch with the same quality of quiet attention he brought to everything, and sometimes when Ruby came out with coffee and found him like that, she stood in the doorway for a moment before joining him, wanting to observe the observation, wanting to see him seeing them, because the version of Cole that existed in the privacy of his own delight was different from all other versions, and she treasured it. She would think sometimes about the night she had walked into the Silver Spur, about Edgar Kane's jovial proclamation, about every man in that room who had turned toward her with such eager availability. She would think about the corner and the man in it who had not looked, and the decision she had made that had seemed impulsive from the outside and had been, from the inside, the quietest and most certain thing she had done in her life. They talked about it once, lying awake on a summer night with the window open and the creek faintly audible below the house and both children asleep in the rooms down the hall. "Why didn't you look?" she asked. That first night. She felt him shift beside her. When? In the Silver Spur, every man in that room turned toward the door and you didn't. He was quiet for a moment. "I heard the door and I heard the room change," he said. "And I thought whatever is happening over there is happening without needing me to be part of it. I had enough to be sitting with already." "What were you sitting with?" "Whether to stay," he said simply. "I had been telling myself I was stopping in Dusty Creek for a week before moving on to the next drive. I was trying to decide what the next drive actually was. I had the land in my head, but I was afraid to want it too specifically." A pause. "And then you sat down." "And then I sat down," Ruby agreed. "And you said you chose the corner because I was the only one not looking," he said, "which meant you were the only one looking for something different." "I was," she said. "So was I," he said. "I just didn't know yet what different looked like." She turned on her side and put her hand against his chest where she could feel his heartbeat. He covered her hand with his and they lay in the summer dark with the window open, and the children breathing down the hall and the creek below the house moving in its quiet perpetual way, and the life they had built together filled the room around them with the particular warmth of things that are real and earned and chosen daily. The fall of 1886 brought changes to Dusty Creek of the kind that come to frontier towns when they pass a certain threshold of stability. A proper bank opened in October. A second church was established to the south of town. A lawyer named Gideon Lake arrived from Austin and set up practice in a small office near the general store. The railroad, which had come through 2 years prior on the north edge of town, brought more regular commerce, and with it the sense that Dusty Creek was becoming less a temporary settlement and more a permanent thing. Harold Finch announced his retirement from the mayor's position in November of that year, which was received by the town with a complex mixture of feelings. A proper election was held in December, the first proper election Dusty Creek had managed, and the man elected was Edgar Kane, who had started the whole evening in the Silver Spur with his proclamation about picking any man in the room and had spent the intervening 4 years becoming, it turned out, a reasonably good civic leader who genuinely cared about the town's welfare. He was imperfect and sometimes overbearing, but he meant well, which is more than can be said for many men in similar positions. Edgar came to the Whitmore house in January to ask Cole to serve on the town planning committee, and Cole looked at Ruby across the kitchen table where they were eating breakfast, and Ruby looked back with the expression that meant she thought he should do it, and Cole told Edgar yes. Del Torres got married that spring to a woman named Maria Ortega, who had come to Dusty Creek with her family from the south, and Cole stood up for him with the same quiet reliability he brought to all things, and the wedding was held in the meadow below the Whitmore house, because it was the prettiest place in the county and Ruby had offered without hesitation. And Maria Torres declared afterward that the cottonwoods were the most beautiful wedding decorations she had ever seen, and she had not even had to arrange them. Tom was 3 years old and had developed the habit of following Cole around the ranch on his designated working mornings, with a small hat that Dorothea Marsh had made him, and a serious expression that was a direct copy of his father's that made every adult who saw it work very hard not to smile in the child's presence, because Tom found being smiled at when he was being serious personally insulting. June watched everything from the secure position of being carried on Ruby's hip, and had opinions about it all, which she delivered in the forceful half-language of a 1-year-old that Cole said he found persuasive regardless of not being able to decode it. The spring of 1887 came in warm and early, and the creek below the house ran full and bright, and the wildflowers in the meadow arrived a full week before usual and in such quantity that Ruby stood at the porch railing on a March morning with her coffee and said quietly to herself, as if needing to say it aloud to believe it, "This is mine." And then she corrected it. Ours. Cole came out of the house with his own coffee and stood beside her and followed her gaze to the meadow and the creek and the 40 acres stretching east. "It's good land," he said. "It's wonderful land," she said. "We should have more of it." He looked at her. "How much more?" "There are 20 acres to the north Hector's son never did anything with," she said. "Del mentioned it last fall. I have been thinking about it since." Cole's mouth curved. "You have been planning a land expansion and did not mention it." "I mentioned it now," she said. "What do you think?" "I think," Cole said, "that you are the most practical and the most quietly ambitious person I have ever known, and I am grateful every day that you walked across the Silver Spur and sat in my corner." "I am also grateful," she said, "though I will note that the corner was not much to look at." "Neither was I," he said. "You were everything to look at," she said, with the directness that was entirely her nature, and he turned and looked at her with the full warmth of his gray-green eyes and leaned down and kissed her temple. And she turned her face up to him, and they stood on the porch of the house above the creek, with the spring light coming over the land and the coffee warm in their hands, and the children's voices just beginning inside the house, as the morning gathered them up. They bought the 20 acres to the north that June, and added it to the 40, which made the Whitmore property the most substantial private landholding east of town. Cole managed the expanded range with the deliberate care he brought to all his work, growing the small cattle herd slowly, maintaining the pasture, and continuing his foreman arrangement with Del at the Beaumont Ranch 3 days a week. The 4th and 5th days of the working week he gave entirely to his own land, and the 6th he rested and helped Ruby with whatever needed doing at the house and school, and the 7th he spent with his family in the particular unhurried way of a man who has learned to value time as much as work. Ruby's school, in the fall of 1887, had 34 students and a waiting list, which prompted another conversation with Edgar Kane about the schoolhouse's capacity. Edgar came to the meeting with plans he had already commissioned from a builder in Amarillo, which was either prepared efficiency or blatant overconfidence, and Ruby chose to see it as the former and worked with the plans until they reflected what she actually needed, and the expanded schoolhouse broke ground in October. James Carver, the serious eldest child of the Missouri family who had asked for the extra reader in his first week, was now 16 and had been asking Ruby for 2 years whether there was a way to continue his education beyond what she could offer. Ruby had been writing letters. She had written to the college in Austin and to the normal school in Dallas and to 2 institutions in New Mexico, and in October of 1887, she received a letter that told her the Territorial Education Board was establishing a scholarship program for exceptional rural students, and she had been named as a recommending teacher, and James Carver was the first name she wrote down. She told him on a Friday afternoon when the other students had gone, sitting across from him at the desk where she had first spread her lesson books almost 5 years before. "There is a scholarship," she said, "for boys who show exceptional academic promise, the normal school in Dallas. It would begin in September of next year. You would be 17. James Carver looked at her with the careful expression of someone who has been careful his whole life about hoping for things. "I don't have money for," he began. "That is what a scholarship means," Ruby said. "You would not need money. You would need your mother's permission and your father's and a letter of recommendation which I have already written." James said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "You already wrote it." "I wrote it in August," Ruby said. "I have been waiting for the right circumstance to share it with you." The 16-year-old who had come from Missouri, with the wary eyes of a child who had been disappointed by schools, sat across from Ruby Calloway Whitmore in the schoolhouse in Dusty Creek, Texas, and the wariness left his face entirely, and what replaced it was the expression of someone who has just discovered that the world intended something good for them after all. Ruby walked home from the schoolhouse that evening in the early dark of November, down the road east of town that she had walked 100 times, past the point where the town buildings gave way to open land, and the road became more track than road, and up the gentle rise to the house with its warm windows lit against the cold. She could see Cole's shadow moving in the kitchen window before she reached the porch, and Tom's smaller shadow beside him, because Tom had recently appointed himself his father's kitchen assistant, which produced meals that were adventurous in their ingredient combinations and entirely edible. She came in through the door, and the smell of supper and the warmth of the stove and June's immediate vocalization of her presence and Tom's earnest report about the food they were making, and Cole turning from the stove with a spoon in his hand, and the expression that had been the best part of her days since the first week she knew him, steady and warm and entirely for her. "Good day?" he asked. "An extraordinary day," she said. She hung her coat and hat and came to the stove and kissed him, and he kissed her back in the unhurried way of people who are certain of each other, and June made the sounds of someone expressing a strong opinion about being left out of proceedings, which Ruby remedied by picking her up and settling her on her hip. "Tell me," Cole said, because he always wanted to hear the details. She told him about James Carver and the scholarship while she held June, and Cole finished the supper, and Tom explained his contributions to the meal with the gravity of a very small scientist describing experimental results. They ate at the kitchen table with the children's noise and the stove's warmth and the dark Texas night outside the windows, and Ruby looked around the table at the people at it, and felt the same thing she felt every time she looked around this table, which was a gratitude so complete it was almost indistinguishable from joy. The winter of 1887 passed, and the spring of 1888 came in, and with it the expansion of the Dusty Creek Schoolhouse, which opened its new addition in March, with a ceremony that Edgar Kane organized with more bunting than was strictly necessary, but with genuine civic pride that Ruby found she could not be annoyed by. James Carver left for Dallas in September with a trunk, his scholarship letter, Ruby's recommendation, and the expression of someone beginning the life that was always supposed to be his. Cole's herd by the fall of 1888 numbered 40 cattle, a modest but real number, and he had fenced the western boundary of his 60 acres with the help of Pete Anson, who was 25 now, and had his own small place to the south, and had become the nearest thing Cole had to a younger brother, the kind of friendship that forms between men who have worked alongside each other in weather and in silence, and have learned each other's quality in that way. Ruby found she was expecting their third child in October of 1888, and told Cole on the porch as she had told him the first time, with the same directness and the same cup of coffee, and he had the same response, which was to put down his cup and cover her hand with his, and ask first if she was well, which she was. The third child arrived in July of 1889, a boy they named Henry, and he arrived without the drama that June had brought with her, and with the apparent intention of being the easiest of the three, which opinion the household held for approximately 6 weeks before Henry revealed that his strategy was simply patience rather than volume. And a patient baby becomes a patient toddler who gets into things with extreme thoroughness and not enough noise to warn you. Tom was 5 by the time Henry arrived and had developed the kind of clear moral code that 5-year-olds sometimes develop from watching parents they respect, and applied it to family governance with more zeal than effectiveness. June was 3, and had opinions about everything and the verbal ability now to share them in complete sentences, which she did constantly. Henry watched them both with the dark-eyed attention of a third child who is learning the world from its most advanced and entertaining sources. The years of Dusty Creek moved through the early 1890s with the gathering solidity of a place that has determined to be permanent. A proper schoolhouse stood on the north side of town. A bank occupied a brick building on the main street. The railroad brought commerce and news and connection to the larger world. The violence of the earlier frontier, the lawlessness and the uncertainty, had not disappeared entirely, but it had pulled back to the edges, and what was at the center was the daily life of a community of people who had chosen a place and were making it into something. Cole Whitmore sat on the Dusty Creek Citizens Committee for 3 years and brought to it the same quality he brought to everything, which was steady practical intelligence and the willingness to say plainly what he thought without needing to dress it in performance. He was not interested in formal position, though Edgar Kane asked him more than once to consider the deputy mayor role. He said that he was already doing what he was suited for, and that the land needed him more than the office did, and Edgar, who had come to know Cole reasonably well, accepted this without pushing further. Ruby taught in the Dusty Creek School until the spring of 1892, when she trained her own replacement, a young woman named Frances Alcott who came from Abilene with good training and better patience, and who sat in Ruby's classroom for a full semester, learning the curriculum and the students, and the Whitmore method of multi-level instruction before Ruby trusted her with it fully. The handover was not without grief, because the school was Ruby's great work, and relinquishing it required the particular courage of believing you have done your part of a thing, and that the thing will continue without you. But she was 33 years old and had 3 children and 60 acres, and a husband she loved with an accumulated depth that had not diminished since the Silver Spur, and had become something more interior and essential with every year, and there was enough in that to fill more than one life. She did not stop being a teacher. She tutored students in the house above the creek, and she continued to write letters of recommendation, and she corresponded with the Territorial Education Board, and she mentored Frances Alcott through the first years in the way that Ruby had always operated, which was by giving away what she knew without keeping score. On an evening in the fall of 1892, Ruby and Cole sat on the porch as they had sat on 1,000 evenings, with the creek below, and the cottonwoods beginning to turn gold with the season, and the children's various noises from inside the house behind them. Tom was 8 and Cole had started teaching him to ride properly, and Tom approached riding with the same intensity he applied to being serious, which produced a child who sat a horse with remarkable composure for his age. June was 6 and had recently decided that she was going to learn everything that Tom learned, which Ruby encouraged without qualification, because June's determination was a thing that deserved direction rather than limitation. Henry was 3 and had attached himself to Fletcher the horse with the specific devotion that small children sometimes give to animals, and Fletcher, who was 13 years old now and had the dignity of an elder statesman, tolerated Henry's attentions with equanimity. 12 years, Ruby said on the porch. 10 since we married. Cole looked at her. What about it? I was counting, she said. I do that sometimes. I count back to the Silver Spur and count forward to here, and I try to hold both things at the same time. What does that feel like? He asked. She looked out at the cottonwoods and the creek and the land that was theirs in the particular way that land becomes yours when you have loved it through all its seasons. Like gratitude, she said. Like the kind of gratitude that is too large for a single chest but you carry it anyway. Cole set down his coffee and turned in his chair to face her, and she turned to face him, and they looked at each other in the October evening on the porch above the creek, with the 10 years of their marriage between them and the 3 children inside the house, and the 60 acres stretching east and north, and the town of Dusty Creek at their backs, growing and permanent and real. I am going to say something I have not said in exactly the right way before, Cole said, with the expression of a man choosing his words with care. Go ahead, she said. Every good thing in my life, he said, is downstream from you sitting down in that corner, the land, the house, the children, the life I did not know I was trying to build until you showed me what I was working toward. Everything good, all of it. He paused. And I want you to know that, not assumed, said. Ruby held his eyes. She had known him for 10 years, known him through weather and celebration and grief, and the ordinary unspectacular days that make up the bulk of a life and are the truest measure of what you have. And she knew his face the way she knew the creek and the cottonwoods, with the knowledge that comes from repeated and loving attention. Cole, she said, the night I walked into the Silver Spur, I had been traveling for 11 days and I had lost the reason for the trip, and I did not know what came next. And I looked around a room full of men who wanted to give me something, and all I could think was that I did not want to be given anything. I wanted to find something myself. She touched his face, and then I found you in the corner, not looking, just being, and I thought that is the one that makes sense. He caught her hand and held it against his face, his eyes very warm. We made something good here, he said. We made something extraordinary, she said. He kissed her on the porch of the house above the creek in the October evening of 1892, while the cottonwoods turned gold below them, and the creek moved over its stones, and their children's voices ran through the house behind them, and the 60 acres of Texas Panhandle stretched into the good autumn dark, and all the years behind them, and all the years ahead rested quietly in the space between them, as they held each other on the porch of the life they had chosen and built and earned together. In the wild and open country that had given them exactly what they had not known to ask for, which was each other, and the land and the time to grow into something complete. The Silver Spur Saloon was still there, down the road in town, where the piano player played most evenings and Tom Garrity's hair had gone mostly white, and the lamps still burned amber. Edgar Kane was still mayor and still prone to more bunting than any occasion required. Dorothea Marsh still ran the dressmaker's shop and still arrived at important moments with bread and forceful opinion. James Carver had come back to Dusty Creek 2 summers ago after his schooling in Dallas, and was teaching in the school beside Francis Alcott, with the quiet dedication of someone returning what was given to them. Dell and Maria Torres had 3 children of their own, and the Beaumont Ranch ran well and steady, and the land of the Panhandle went on in all directions under the enormous Texas sky. The house above the creek had 5 rooms now, and a porch that wrapped around 2 sides, and a barn that Cole had built in the spring of 1891, and a kitchen garden that Ruby managed with the same systematic attention she gave to everything, and a horse in the pasture for Tom and a smaller one for June, and Fletcher, who was now 15 and the most respected member of the household after Cole, living out his years in peace with Henry's devoted and sometimes alarming affection as his daily companion. In the mornings, Ruby would sometimes stand at the kitchen window while the coffee boiled and look out at the land in the early light, the grass and the creek and the sky, and she would hear Cole behind her coming down the hall, still heavy-footed in the mornings in the way of a man who is fully awake before he is fully present, and she would not turn around because she did not need to, and he would come to stand behind her and put his hands on her shoulders and look out the window with her at the land. And they would stand like that in the morning light, without needing to say anything at all. That was the thing she had not known to want, in those 11 days on the stagecoach to a town she had never seen, heading toward a purpose that dissolved before she arrived. She had known she wanted roots and work and a place that needed her. She had not known she wanted a person who stood behind her in the morning and looked at the same things she looked at with the same quality of attention, who had built the frame of what they had together out of the same materials she had used for herself, which were honesty and work and the refusal to be less than fully present in one's own life. She had walked across a saloon in Dusty Creek, Texas, in October of 1882 and sat down at the corner table of a man who was not looking, and found in the not looking exactly what she was looking for. The coffee boiled. The October light came gold through the window. The creek moved over its stones below the house. Cole's hands rested on her shoulders, warm and calloused and certain, and Ruby Calloway Whitmore, schoolteacher and rancher's wife and mother of 3 and builder of a life she had made from loss and intention and one very important decision in a lamplit saloon, smiled at the window and the morning and everything it contained, and was home.